I'm going to talk about the narrator of the story, Desiree's Baby. And the narrator is a third-person omniscient narrator, which lets us, the audience, into the minds of the characters in the story. And here, marked by the gray highlight, there's a description of how Amand Obigny feels when he first falls in love with our main character, Desiree. The passion that awoke in him that day when he saw her at the gate swept along like an avalanche, like a prairie of fire, or like anything that drives headlong over all obstacles. This kind of description is only possible through a first-person narrator or a third-person omniscient narrator, which is the case in this story. And as I said before, it lets us, the audience, into the minds and the thoughts of the characters. Furthermore, for the narrator, it's a very descriptive narrator, which I have an example for here, also marked by the gray highlight. It reads that big solemn oaks grew close to it, and their thick-leaved, far-reaching branches shadowed like a pall. This is a very, very descriptive sentence, and that contributes to the atmosphere of the story and helps paint a picture imagery for the audience. And this is just one of many descriptive sentences throughout the story. Another thing that's special about this kind of narrator is the use of partly French dialogues, which occurs a couple of times through the story. I have an example here. It reads, "The woman bowed her turban head majestically. Merci, madame." This use of the French dialogues maintain the authentic vibe that is throughout the story. And the kind of French sentences that are used are very simple sentences that you may have heard before or can figure out on your own what means. So you don't have to speak fluently French to understand these references, these small French phrases that are used in the story. The main themes in the story is the issue of race. And in this story, it's the slave owners look at their slaves, the African Americans that are mostly represented. In this quote right here, marked with the green highlight, it shows how there are very different types of slave owners. Young Obigny's rule was a strict one too, and under it, his Negroes had forgotten how to be gay as they had been during the old master's easygoing and indulgent lifetime. As I said before, this shows that there are various types of slave owners, and no one but the master of the household could determine the working and living conditions of the slaves. So when the master changes, so does their living conditions and working conditions. Even the difference between a father and his son's view on their slaves could be extreme. In this next quote, I've chosen it because it shows that even though Amand was married to Desiree, she had nothing to say when it came to how they would run their slaves. The quote reads, "He hasn't punished one of them, not one of them since baby is born." This is Desiree talking to a mother, explaining to her how the habits of the slave owner Amand had changed, and he had been more easygoing and happy around them. Desiree doesn't share his usual look on their slaves, but she's not in a position to do anything about it, because at this time it was only the master, the man of the house, that had anything to say about that. In this next quote, I'm just going to read it first. It was a cry that she could not help, which she was not conscious of having uttered. The blood turned like ice in her veins, and clammy moisture gathered upon her face. She fears for her baby's future and for her own security as Amand's wife after she found out that her child, Desiree's baby, was actually of African American heritage. As a slave owner herself, she fully knows and understands the consequences of being of color, and that is why she has this reaction after finding out that her baby is not white. In this last quote about race, it reads, "Night and day I thank the God the good God for having so arranged our lives that our dear Armand will never know that his mother, who adores him, belongs to the race that is cursed with the brand of slavery. This is the plot twist of the story in the very end, and is of course also about race. This is a man when he finds out that his mother and her family belongs to the race that is cursed with slavery, and that they've kept this knowledge for him to protect him and secure him a safe future, just like Desiree feared for her baby's future when she finds out that her baby is actually of color.